Well, I know what you're probably thinking. Holiday Bible Club has just finished, and by the sounds of it, so is all the fun in the world. It's not an easy psalm. Most of David's psalms that he writes are pretty depressing, and that's a reality that I'm going to have to look at this morning. However, in the midst of all that despair, there's that little verse at the end, which was what the memory verse was, Psalm 13, verse 5. I rely on your constant love. In this case, I trust in your unfailing love. You have rescued me. There are so many instances throughout the Bible where we find these episodes of depression, of despair, of anguish, of writers who basically they're just having a moan, they're having a whinge, they don't like their life, and then suddenly there's this beautiful, beautiful moment within it, within their rant, within their moans, where they say, do you know what, God, actually, I trust in your love. And that's what I want to look at this morning. Do you know, some of the Holiday Bible Club songs can be interesting. As you will have noticed by some of them are quite lengthy, quite wordy. The actions can get quite difficult while she's singing as well. But there was one song this year that we were here practicing in the run-up to Holiday Bible Club, and I was sitting at the back typing up all the lyrics and stuff, and the band are doing a great job playing at the front. And suddenly we played that song, I Rely on Your Constant Love, and it dawned on us that actually, that's true. SPORT joined us, but all that stuff's really cool for the kids to get involved, to have fun. But I rely on your constant love. And suddenly there was a sense of, this is worship. This is more than just singing a song in front of kids. This is worship. And so that's what I want to look at. I want to look at relying on God's love. We've got to understand what it means. We can have the PowerPoint ready to go. There we go. What does it mean to rely on God's love? Well, when you came in this morning, you sat down on a chair. Not quite like this chair, but it was too difficult to get a picture of those chairs. But you sat down on a chair, and you expected it not to fall. You expected that chair to take your weight, because you relied on that chair structure to withhold your weight. You don't think about it, but that's what you did. You expected it to do what it's designed to do. It wouldn't be right, and I tried not to, but I'm going to mention the Olympics, sorry. I don't know if any of you saw this guy. Ran up to do his pole vault with his pole in his hand, and it snapped in 3 places, and rather than going upwards, he went forwards. Luckily he was okay, there was no injury. But this guy, when he's running up, as with all of the other competitors, he relies on his piece of sporting equipment, his pole, that will bend so that he can be propelled upwards over the high line. Sometimes it doesn't work, sometimes he doesn't bend his body enough, sometimes he knocks the bar over, but he expects that pole to propel him high enough to reach over that bar. And it would be unfair to mention the Olympics and not the Paralympics. So what about the blind sprinters? Those who, the rules are the same. If you cross the white line of your lane, you're disqualified. But for those who are blind and can't see those lines, they rely on their running guide to help them complete the task that they've got ahead. Anyone who knows me well enough will know that I quite like trains. So much so that I have some magazines at home. And I love living in London because there's lots of trains in London. But you see it all the time. You see these people who, the business suits, come into the train station every morning. They are so routine. They shower at the same time every day. They eat their toast at the same time every day. They arrive at the platform and touch their Oyster card on the gate to the way into the station at the same time every day. And they get on exactly the same train every day. And you see, what they do is to minimise wasted time. They make sure that that train gets them to work 30 seconds before they have to be there. Any later, and they are late. But then, of course, you turn up at a train station, and quite often you see this. What happens then? Well, they're late for work. We don't know their situation. Maybe they've been told you've been late 3 times, one more time, you're out. They've just got fired. They rely on that one train. And whether you think they're idiotic or not, whether you think they should get different trainers, is not the point here. The point is they rely on that one train to get them to work at the same time every single day. There's a train at the high-speed rail network in Spain. If you are late to your destination, if the train is late by more than 5 minutes, you get a full refund. Imagine how much money London would if that was the case. One more example. Do you remember Indiana Jones? He was a hero. Indiana Jones in the Last Crusade. And the whole way through, they're looking for the Holy Grail, which in the film is portrayed as the cup of Christ, they refer to it as. And they reach this temple at the end of the canyon, and the whole film's been about them searching for this. Where is the Holy Grail? They arrive. And Indiana Jones finds out that he's got to go through 3 tasks, as it were, 3 booby traps to try and get through to the room that the Holy Grail is in. And the first one, if you remember, is the blade. And he remembers his dad's written a diary, and the diary has hints and instructions that up till this point he didn't know what they meant. And suddenly he realises what these hints and these instructions meant. And the first one is about kneeling and praying. So Indiana Jones is thinking, kneel, oh, kneel, and the blade goes, whoomph, straight over his head, and just misses. And then he moves on a little bit, and he gets to this big square, sort of tile, I don't know, chessboard style piece of flooring, and each square has got a little letter on it. And he remembers the clue in the diary is the name of God. And he realises he's got to work out the spelling of the name of God to get, not G-O-D, obviously, it's a bit harder. But then he does it, well, the first one he fails as he puts his foot through and he falls right through the ground. Luckily he's still on the platform, so lift himself back up. But then thirdly, and everyone knows this task, it's the leap of faith. And he gets to those 2 cliff edges and he's standing on the edge, and the camera angle, it's not the illusion, but the camera angle says there is no walkway for him to get from one edge, one cliff, to the other cliff. And he remembers to take a leap of faith. And he's so close to turning around and going back. And he's, do you know what? I'm going to rely on the instructions. They've got me through this far. I'm going to rely on them. And he takes a step, boom, the camera angle changes, and there's a path. Oh, surprise, surprise. Do you know, relying involves a faith and a belief. Indiana Jones believed in the instructions that his dad had written down for him. Those businessmen and women believe, I don't know why, have faith, that the London Transport Network will get them to work on time. The athletes rely on their equipment because they believe it will do the job that they're designed to do. And that's what David speaks of in Psalm 3. He speaks of how he relies on God. No matter what the situation, he relies on God. I want to read. I feel I've got a bit too happy up to this point. So I'm going to read from Lamentations 3. I'm going to read the whole thing because, well, not the whole of Lamentations. I'm reading from chapter 3. And these are Jeremiah. You thought David was depressed? Let's hear what Jeremiah says. I'm the one who has seen the afflictions that come from the rod of the Lord's anger. He's led me into darkness, shutting out all light. He's turned his hand against me again and again, all day long. He's made my skin and flesh grow old. He's broken my bones. He's besieged and surrounded me with anguish and distress. He's buried me in a dark place like those long dead. He's walled me in and I can't escape. He's bound me with heavy chains. And I cry out and I shout, but he has shut out my prayers. He's blocked my way with a high wall, and he's made my road crooked. He's hidden like a bear or a lion waiting to attack me. It goes on. Wow. Wow, it's depressing. He's shot arrows deep into my heart, it says. He's filled me with bitterness. He made me chew on gravel. The thought of my suffering and homelessness is bitter beyond words. I'll never forget this awful time as I grieve over my loss. Jeremiah is depressed. Jeremiah is in a tough place when he writes this. And then verse 21. Yet, I still dare to hope when I remember the faithful love of the Lord never ends. His mercies never cease. As we sang before, great is his faithfulness. Jeremiah, surrounded by sin, by sorrow, by despair and anguish, he sees a ray of hope that is the love of God. It's the same with David, that in the middle of everything they're going through, they still see that tiny, tiny ray of hope that is the love of God. But that's all well and good. What does it mean for us to rely on God's love? How can we rely on that love? I want you to picture, I was going to try and do a picture on the screen, it was too complicated. I want you to picture that the earth is back here, and around the earth are massive ropes. And these ropes are anchored to your waist. And these ropes, they represent money, they represent jobs, they represent cars, houses, family, friends. Do you know, these are things, they're not bad for us. And actually here on the earth, it's not wrong for us to like some of these things. But what is wrong is to say, God, I'm going to rely totally on your love whilst having these ropes wrapped around your waist. Because how are you relying on God if actually what you're relying on is these ropes of money, of possessions, of cars, of jobs, of family and friends? How can you rely on God? It's like, I don't know if anyone saw this fella, the tightrope walker who tried to cross Niagara Falls, and he's done it before, and he said, this time I want to do it without using any safety equipment. I just want to walk across. He's got a balance beam. You can see his balance beam there. It helps him to keep steady. He said that's all he wanted. And the American cable network that were going to present it live, they said you can't do it live unless you have a safety harness. And so he had to put that safety harness on. Do you know what? That's just what it's like for us when we rely on things that aren't God's love. When we rely on things of the earth. They're like a safety harness, which in theory, in this case, sounds good. But in the case of trusting in God, all it's doing is pulling you away from the faithful love that God has for you. It's a fallback plan. Why do you need a fallback plan when God's love is constant? We had a lot of fun. I think it was Tuesday. Was it Tuesday we put Goliath up? You see him at the back. He's actually just short of 9 foot. He was a bit bigger, and then he fell. So we actually built him a little bit. But when we put him up, I was standing by the guys putting him up. And as they put him on the top, basically we built his leg structure and the body structure separate, put the body on top of the legs. And as we put the body on, you could see the people holding it they were a little bit cautious. It's on top. Should we let it? No, it's wobbling. Let's hold it. Oh, is it good? Well, no, it's falling. Right, again, they didn't rely on the structure of the leg. In the end, we had to take him apart, rebuild him, and put him back on. And now we can rely on his legs, but this is a lot later. But they had a fallback plan. They were creating a fallback plan. If the legs couldn't withhold the body, it was okay, because they were going to stand there for the rest of holiday Bible. Do you know, in the midst of despair, how can we let go of the ropes that we cling to? The things of the earth, the things of the world that the world says are important. I want to introduce you to a guy. I don't know if you've seen this guy before. His name is Nicholas James Wojcik. Nick Wojcik. And he was born on the 4th of December 1982. And he was born with a disease or a syndrome called tetraamelia syndrome. And he's quite recognisable because he's got no arms or legs. He's got the tetraamelia syndrome affects all 4 of your limbs, and he was born completely without them. And he struggled as a child, as I'm sure you can imagine. He used to ask God. His parents were, his father was a pastor of a church. And this young boy, who is brought up in a family that says, God is the best, God loves you, he said, God, if that's the case, why am I like this? Why? And you know, he said at 15, he got his answer from God. And God's answer were these 2 words, trust me. Do you know, when you ask God, why is something happening in your life, Do you expect the answer? Trust me. I think when we pray and we say, God, why is this happening? Why is this happening? Why is my life like this? Why am I going through this? You expect God to give you a detailed plan of where you've come from and where you're going and where this falls in your life journey. This guy heard God say, trust me. And he did. At 15, he gave his life to Christ. At 17, he started his own organisation called Life Without Limits. He now goes around the world preaching and teaching about hope, about life in the midst of despair, and about disability, and how to find the meaning in life. He speaks about his belief in God, and how he can use any willing heart to do his work for him. At 10 years old, this guy tried to commit suicide. He tried to roll over in the bath and drown himself, because he couldn't have an answer to why. In the midst of despair, he trusted in the love of God at the age of 15. Do you know, Paul, who writes towards the back of the Bible, the letters at the back of the Bible, he's writing to the church in Rome, and he says this: I am convinced that nothing can ever separate us from God's love. Neither death nor life, angels nor demons, neither fears for today or worries about tomorrow. Not even the powers of hell can separate us from God's love. No power in the sky. In fact, no power in all of God's creation will ever be able to separate us from the love of God that is revealed to us in Christ Jesus. Paul was confident in the love that God had for him and for each of those who chose to love God. I want to read an extract from a book called Crazy Love. It's by a guy called Francis Chan. He's an American preacher and speaker, and he writes this book called Crazy Love. His tagline for the book is "Overwhelmed by a relentless God." And what he means by relentless is a God that doesn't stop loving. He writes this in the book: have you ever met someone who was utterly and desperately in love with Jesus? I have. My wife's grandma, Clara. I spoke recently at Grandma Clara's funeral, and I could honestly tell the mourners gathered that I have never known anybody more excited to see Jesus. Every morning, Clara would kneel on the corner of her bed, and she would spend precious hours with her Saviour. Then later in the day, just the sight of that corner of the bed would bring joy-filled tears and a deep anticipation of the next morning that she could spend kneeling in the presence of her God. Grandma Clara acted toward God the way we act towards people that we are madly in love with. When you're in love, you go to great lengths to be with the one you love. You drive for hours to be together. I'm going to put my romantic voice on. You drive for hours to be together, even if it's only for a short while. You don't mind staying up really late to talk. Walking in the rain becomes romantic, not annoying. You'll willingly spend a small fortune on the one that you're crazy about. When you're apart, it's painful, even miserable. He or she is all you think about, and you'll jump at any chance to be with them. And then he quotes a guy called John Piper. And John Piper said this: the critical question for our generation, in fact for every generation, is this: if you could have heaven with no sickness, with all the friends you've ever known on earth, with all the food that you've ever loved, all the leisure activities you've ever enjoyed, all the natural beauties you ever saw, all the physical pleasures you ever tasted, no human conflict or any natural disasters, could you be satisfied in heaven if Christ was not there? How many of you will read those words and say, do you know what? I just might be okay with that. If you're deeply and madly in love with God, as Grandma Clara was, you know that you could never be satisfied with the heaven that Christ was not part of. Christ was an expression of God's love. He loved us so much. John 3:16, classic verse, that he sent his one and only Son to die for us. Do you know, we quote it so often. Think about that verse. God had one son, and he sent him to die for each and every one of us. It's a crazy kind of love. It's a love that is constant, a love that is faithful, and a love that is with you in every walk of life. So can you, in the midst of despair, turn to God and say, do you know what, God? It doesn't matter whether you give me a detailed, reported answer to my question of why. What matters is that I can trust in you. Can you trust in God in the midst of hope, in the midst of despair, in the midst of anguish, in the midst of depression? Can he be your ray of hope? Amen.